The late Rafiq Farah spent over 50 years of active service ministering to congregations in the Diocese of Jerusalem. This, of course, was the introduction of what became a lifetime of ministry and social care, mostly conducted in the discomfort of prevailing conflicts in the Middle East. Archdeacon Rafiq Farah authored many books during his time as a priest, and most importantly, his book, A History of the Anglican Diocese of Jerusalem, 1841-1991, in 2 volumes. Archdeacon Rafiq Amin Farah is survived by cousins, nieces, nephews, and 4 children, Amin, Nabil, Karma, and Randa, who is in fact a senior member of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies Senior Academic Board. May the late Rafiq Amin Farah rest in peace. My lords, your eminence, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of the launch of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies book discussion series, it gives me a great pleasure and honor to kindly request our dearest friend, the first active patron of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies, the 104th Archbishop of Canterbury, the Master of Magdalen College, Cambridge in the last decade, the Right Reverend and the Right Honorable Lord Dr. Rowan Williams, to give his keynote address, please.
I'm very happy indeed to be able to greet you as one of the patrons of the Cambridge Center for Palestinian Studies, and to express how very pleased I am that this series of seminars on important books is underway. And tonight, a word of special welcome to our distinguished guest, Dr. Munther Isaac. His book on the situation of Palestinian Christians reflects a situation of which we're all deeply conscious, which is in our prayers and our concern, which needs not to be pushed off the radar of our concerns and our priorities here in the West. It's a book about what happens on the other side of a wall. And as I reflected on that, I thought a bit about what messages are conveyed when we build walls. Many of you will know the colloquial phrase in English about throwing dead cats over the wall. If somebody in your organization or your community is troublesome, you try and find them a position somewhere else. It's something that bishops sometimes do with troublesome clergy. They pass them on to a neighboring diocese. And there's a lot of talk there about throwing dead cats over the wall. Over the wall is where things are invisible, where the things that are too difficult and too challenging for us to come to terms with are hidden. And that's the first thing that walls do. They hide. They hide because we can't cope, because we can't be honest enough to see where the fault lines are in our own communities and where we actually need to face problems rather than throwing them away and pushing them out of sight. We build walls so that we don't have to cope with what we're afraid of. And that's the first thing which I think we ought to reflect on, where we see walls being built, whether in the Middle East or indeed in the United States of America under its last president. Here's a problem which looks too difficult for us. We'll push it away into another territory, over the wall. The second thing that walls do, of course, is to shut out part of the view, part of the landscape. a landscape in the broadest possible sense, not just geographical but cultural and historical, a landscape that in fact we share and ought to know how to share better. When walls are built, they restrict the view. They make us think that there are given and fixed boundaries beyond which we can't or dare not go, and they undermine the idea that there might be a genuine sharing, a genuine life together. Because they block out the view, they block out something of our imagination, and they destroy something of our hope. When a wall is built and a boundary is consolidated in that way, the truth is, in fact, that there is less space for everyone. Not just that one group is excluded from contact with another, but the group doing the excluding is itself shrinking its own territory. That's to say, its own territory of imagination and compassion and hope. Everybody is damaged when walls are built like that. The third thing that comes to mind when I think of walls is, of course, that walls are surfaces which are very often written on. We all know about the graffiti we see on walls, the graffiti we see on the wall in the Holy Land, the graffiti we see on walls in our own neighborhoods. What might we read written on the wall? I want to suggest that the sad truth is where we have a wall like the one that divides Israelis and Palestinians. It's a wall on both sides of which is written the message, "You are not safe." On one side, the message is, beyond this are your enemies. They are out to undermine you at every point. They are ruthlessly dedicated to exterminating you. You are not safe, and you never will be. And you certainly won't be safe without this barrier. And on the other side, you are not safe means you are not safe to admit to this territory. You are not safe from humiliation and harassment when you try to cross into this territory. You are not safe even in the land you occupy, the land where you are settled. On both sides, people receive that message. You are not safe. And the implication of that is each side must look after its own security, and that security will always be at the expense of the other. All those things come to mind when we think about walls, and especially in the context we're reflecting on in this event. My hope and my prayer for what we share with Dr. Isaac on this occasion, my hope and my prayer for the impact of his book and all of his work, is that these issues that I've sketched in these last few minutes might just possibly be addressed by those most closely involved and by the world community. What do we need? We need, as this book so eloquently demonstrates, we need the visibility, the audibility of communities on the other side, particularly those who have historically been silenced and oppressed. We don't need slogans, we don't need banners to march under, but we need authentic human experience to be voiced and communicated as fully and as honestly as possible. That's what we all hope to hear, what we all hope to reflect in the light of what Dr. Isaac shares with us. And then what's needed is self-awareness. Communities that build walls to shut out others, I've suggested, are in the process of denying something about their own societies. blocking out problems that look too difficult to face? Can we hope for a future in which our kinsfolk and friends, and potential friends and present enemies actually look at what they're doing and how they diminish themselves? Can we look for a future in which people in Israel are ready to look at the fault lines, the damage that undermines their own security, their own integrity? And of course, if we ask it of others, we have to ask it of ourselves. We have to ask whether on both sides there can be an awareness, a critical awareness, a readiness to grow, to move, well, we might say to be converted all around, converted to the possibility of living with the other, converted to the possibility of that shared landscape, that shared social space, that shared territory, which I know Dr. Isaac and all his fellow Palestinian Christians long for, to pray for. Third, to talk about looking for a shared future is to recognize the all-important fact that security is only really secure when it is shared. I am secure when you are secure. I am safe when you are safe. Neighboring societies are safe when both alike know that they are secure. And that terrible zero-sum game of supposing that I can only be secure if I make you unsafe, if I undermine and harass and oppress you, that's not security. At the very best, that is the shortest of short-term solutions to a problem. It doesn't begin to look at how we need one another to be safe. And so, the last and not the least thing is the question of how we actually work to make safety together, to make security together. That means a lot of risks, a lot of stepping back from what we think makes us secure. It means holding out a promise which, in the territories of Israel and Palestine, seems so remote, so almost unthinkable, and yet is so necessary to the peace of that land and the peace of the world. It means stepping out in the hope of a genuinely shared sovereignty, true political unity, a sense of common good, common aspiration, and above all, shared welcome. It's the very opposite of that wall on both sides of which is written the terrible message, you are not safe. If that message is there, then all the communities involved and around have to wake up to the fact that their safety lies in each other's hands. They need to take the steps and take the initiatives that will make that a reality, which, God willing, means, in the long run, and we hope it's not too long, the tearing down of the walls of separation that divide, the walls of separation that literally set in stone those death-dealing messages of insecurity and fear, the realities of daily oppression, daily undermining and humiliation. So, with all that in mind, I hope that tonight we shall be able to join in true prayer and reflection on what it is that gives visibility and audibility to those so often forgotten. How we work for a real critical self-awareness, especially with a more powerful partner in this region. How we build shared hope, not least by those risky and all-important initiatives that cross the frontier in some way, that remind people of common concerns and common agendas. How we erase those messages that tell us you're not safe. So I wish every blessing and good fortune to this enterprise, to the work of the Centre. I say my thanks to those who helped this event to take place, and repeat my welcome to Dr. Isaac. Looking forward to what he has to share with us. Thank you.
My lords, your eminence, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf, I'd like to thank Dr. Rowan Williams for a splendid, multidisciplinary and thought-provoking address. This is, I am sure, will enrich and inform our discussion tonight. So thank you again, and please, Victoria, take over from here. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Makram. And now I am delighted to be passing the chairmanship of the first event in our book discussion series to the coordinator of the Religion and Theology Research Cluster at CCPS, the Reverend Dr. Yazid Said. Dr. Yazid Said is a lecturer in Islamic Studies at Liverpool Hope University. He studied classical Arabic and English literature at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and Christian theology at the University of Cambridge. After being ordained as an Anglican priest, he completed his PhD at the University of Cambridge on the medieval Muslim theologian Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. He has held positions in Montreal, Dublin, and Tübingen University before arriving in Liverpool. He is the author of Ghazali's Politics and Context and the co-editor of The Future of Interfaith Dialogue, Muslim-Christian Encounters Through a Common Word. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Yazid Said.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm grateful to you for all your work in setting this gathering, and to Dr. Makram for calling upon us to gather for this first book discussion, focused on the often neglected, as we've heard from Lord Williams, reality of Palestinian history and culture, mainly that of the ancient Palestinian Christian presence, that historically contributed in manifold ways to Palestinian life, whether in politics or indeed in the arts. Palestinian Christians who always saw themselves rooted in Palestinian life sought to be as such a broker for goods and aspired to be the yeast of society, to use the imagery from one of the parables of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. With this in mind, it is my utmost privilege and pleasure to introduce our guest author today, who joins us directly from Bethlehem in Palestine, the Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac. Dr. Munther, Palestinian Christian pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, is also the academic dean of the Bethlehem Bible College. He originally studied civil engineering at Birzeit University in Palestine, and then he obtained his master's in biblical studies from Westminster Theological Seminary, and then a PhD from the Oxford Centre for Mission Studies here in the UK. His latest book, The Other Side of the Wall, a Palestinian Christian narrative of lament and hope, is the focus of this event. But he has other publications, such as From Land to Lands, From Eden to the Renewed Earth, as well as works in Arabic with his Introduction to Palestinian Theology and commentary on the Book of Daniel. He's also a Kairos Palestine board member. Munther, it's wonderful to have you with us. As you know, the rise of Palestinian theology in Arabic, responding to its own particular context, started to emerge in greater force in the 1980s, with various contributions from Catholic and Protestant and Orthodox leaders, such as the writings of Ilyas Shakur, the works of a Liqa Center in Bethlehem, led by the late Julius Khoury, the public contributions of Patriarch Michel Sabah and Bishop Munib Yunan and Bishop Atallah Hanna, the subsequent development of the Palestinian liberation theology with Naim Atiq, the Anglican priest, and of course, your own colleague in Bethlehem, Dr. Mitri Rahib. Not to forget, of course, the other esteemed Palestinian Lutheran, Rifat Qassis. And you yourself summed up in a systematic way a good review of Palestinian theology in your Arabic introduction to Palestinian theology called the Al-Madkhal ila Lahut al-Filastini in Arabic. So as we begin this exciting engagement with your work, perhaps you can begin to tell us to what extent do you see your latest book contributing or adding to this important history?
So, good evening, friends, and thank you, Yazid, for this introduction. And let me just begin by thanking the Cambridge Center for Palestinian Studies for this invitation. I'm really privileged by this, and I feel a big weight of being the first in the series of the book launch. So I hope I live up to the expectations. And of course, I'm grateful and deeply honored for the contribution of the Right Reverend Rowan Williams at the beginning of this session, which I believe adds a lot to what I hope to share through this book. And thanks for all who are attending and who are interested either in the topic or in the book or in my own writings. I'm truly humbled to speak in the virtual presence, as we say, of many of whom I consider mentors and teachers, especially as I've been looking through the names here. I really just hope that this book serves in the efforts of towards the just peace in the land. And as you said, Yazid, it's in the line of Palestinian theology as well. And let me summarize what I hope to communicate through this book in 8 quick points that I hope help you understand or get a window into the book. And I first start by my first point to state the obvious that Palestinian Christians exist. And as has already been noted, this is a present that has been often ignored or forgotten, whether willingly or by, without will. And it's an often missed aspect of the Palestinian picture. And our existence is not merely a coincidence or an accident, or we're not a product of Western missionary efforts. Rather, I think it's important to emphasize that we are an original, an indigenous component of the rich and diverse history of what we call historical Palestine and of the Palestinian people. And here's my point, that our mere presence, let alone our voice and perspective, presents a challenge today to many Western Christian positions when it comes to Palestine. And I hope that I illustrated this in the book, and as I will do now next in this presentation. My second point is that we are, and we have been now for a while, on the other side of the wall. And I use the title of the book, The Other Side of the Wall, to describe both the ugly, physical, actual, concrete separation wall that I see every day going to the Bible College in Bethlehem, that is visible from most windows in the Bethlehem region. But I also speak about an invisible, yet just as real of a wall that has for a long time separated and pushed aside the Palestinian reality. Because we have been for years ignored and dismissed, even dehumanized. Take, for example, this slogan like "land without people for a people without a land, which was said when knowing too well that the land had people, yet still it was described as a land without people. And by the way, British theologians promoted this position before the Zionist movement was even created. This marginalization or pushing aside of Palestinians is also evident today by the fact that we are invisible to the vast majority of the millions of pilgrims who visit the Holy Land on pilgrimage tours, most in Bethlehem. And they are told that it's dangerous to come to our side of the wall. Similarly, we are invisible in theological textbooks that speak of Israel, the Jews, the Promised Land, the relationship between the church and Israel, which is a dominant discipline today. And most of the time, we are invisible, which gives the impression that the state of Israel was established on an empty land. In other instances, the impression is that the new state brought culture and civilization, turning the desert simply a backward group of people who inhabited parts of the land until the state of Israel came and brought life to this land. Ideas about fulfillment of prophecies, about God's faithfulness to the Jewish people when Israel was established, all miss the point that we exist and that the land was never empty. The reality of the wall, by the way, also manifests itself when Palestinian Christians are silenced, when we are attacked by even fellow Christians, usually Western Christians, though not exclusively. This is a phenomenon that extends to different countries around the world where there are efforts to silence Palestinian Christians, simply, as I said, because we challenge the common and dominant political and biblical perspective about Palestine and Israel. And certainly in the book, I narrate many, many incidents and examples of one might only call the systematic silencing of Palestinian Christians, and which begs the question as to why is this done? These silences can easily turn, the silencing of Palestinian Christians can easily turn into the dehumanizing of Palestinians by throwing all sorts of labels. And I think of the Right Reverend Rowan Williams' question in the beginning of his presentation, what is written on that wall? I think it's clear to me what's written on the other side of the wall. We see words that describes Palestinians as terrorists, as dangerous. And to me, nothing illustrates this more than a quote from the former American Vice President, a self-confessing Christian, what he said in the Israeli Knesset when he described America's position with Israel by saying, we stand with Israel because we believe in right over wrong, in good over evil, and in liberty over tyranny. In other words, Palestinians are the evil, the wrong, the tyrant. And this to me illustrates the mentality of the wall, dividing people into us versus them. And finally, this reality of the wall manifests itself even when our right to non-violently resist the occupation is delegitimized. And my third point is that walls today are a reflection of a wider global mentality. This is what I call in the book the theology of the empire. And today, this empire approach goes like this. First, we promote the myth that people who are different cannot coexist, especially if we create the notion that people are classes. People are different because there are two classes of people. In our case, Palestinian theologian Rahib wrote, it is used in the context of the clash of civilization to communicate cultural superiority vis-a-vis Islam. And as such, the world is easily divided into us versus them, us with the axis of good, them being the axis of evil. And we create these walls first through speech, through writing, through stereotyping. The wall in the United States and all the controversy around it, I think the wall began, or it first begins when think of when President Trump called Mexicans murderers and rapists. That's how walls are built. That's when walls are built. So the separation turns into dehumanization. It turns into putting all the blame on one side just because they're not like us. And in this case, you can now justify even violence as self-defense. You can justify violence as bringing democracy, bringing civilization. And today, nothing illustrates this more than the reality in Gaza, where it's easy to justify and go with the besieging of 3 million people and blaming it on them. And this mentality of us versus them, to a certain degree, I believe this is what Edward Said wrote or promoted in his book Orientalism, dividing the world into the Orient versus the Occident. Today we see it manifested in how many Western Christians still look at Palestinians, and we certainly see it as Palestinian Christians. And in my book, and especially as I address Western Christian approaches to the land, and as I challenge in my book Christian Zionism, which took an extended length in the book, I describe a theology of the empire, not just in this sense of dividing, but here are some other characteristics of imperial theology: the employment of God and sacred text. God is on our side, using the language of chosenness to promote superiority and privilege. And here is a reality that we had to deal with for a long time now as Palestinian Christians. The fact that all of this is used from the Bible, our own sacred text. In addition to employment of God, even when you have God on your side, you can relativize and even redefine justice. How else can you define the occupation? Well, you employ, this is God's, God gave the land to them. They're not occupying it, God gave it to them. The empire, or the theology of the empire, controls the narrative. It controls even the theological discourse and force us to deal with their own parameters of the game. Other tactics include instilling fear of the other, and also conducting oneself from a position of privilege and entitlement. And as I said, I illustrate this in detail with examples in the book. My fourth point is to introduce the book is that we believe, and this might sound controversial, but to us, Western theology is part of the problem. And so from a Palestinian Christian perspective, it is safe to say that we view Western approaches to the land, to the conflict, to the peoples of the land as problematic, as part of the problem, rather than part of the solution, which is what one expects from the church to promote peace. And please note that I do not limit the problem, or I do not limit what I call Western approaches to Christian Zionism. Although Christian Zionism is certainly the most obvious and most aggressive form, and we have seen it manifested at its fullness during the Trump presidency through their work to move the embassy from American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and other things, through the billions of dollars in support over the years to Israel, that these billions of dollars have gone mainly to settlement projects, which is ironic that settlements that are illegal to the international law are supported, funded by Christian groups, and even the Israeli military is funded by these groups. Christian Zionism certainly has no vision for peace, and it promotes end-time scenarios that include global wars, and ironically, the annihilation of 2/3 of the Jews. But as I said, and in my engagement in the book and in other writings, I do not limit the issue to Christian Zionism, because mainline denominations, what one might call also liberal Christianity, whether it's Protestants or Catholics, can also be part of the problem through sometimes the divination of Israel, describing the creation of Israel in divine language as if, and many times to the protection over against any criticism of Israel and Zionism. And I talk about this in details in the book. Many times Christian-Jewish dialogue groups, and I am part of some Christian-Jewish dialogue groups, but many times these groups put pressure and lobby against Palestinian Christian voices. For us, for example, we were deeply troubled when some churches accepted the definition of International Holocaust Museum about anti-Semitism, which gives criticizing Israel as an example of anti-Semitism, which was, as I said, adopted sometimes without careful reflection from some churches, which, by the way, is problematic in the sense that there are many Jews today who are critical of the occupation. Does that mean that they can be themselves anti-Semitic? And this is why also in the book, I explain in length why it is important to engage as Christian groups with what I call other Jewish voices, other Jewish neighbors, and not allow the Christian-Jewish dialogue to be monopolized by strong groups that only look at the things from one side. For example, I wish Christian churches today engage with B'Tselem's report. B'Tselem is an Israeli Jewish organization of human rights activists, which came very recently with an extensive report that argues for calling Israel an apartheid state. Of course, these Jewish voices find no room on the table in Jewish Christian dialogue groups. And I say, how come? And I think this is important. But going back to Western Christian theology, I think it's also a problem through the passive approach of churches. This is what South African friends of mine call toothless Christianity, a church that prays for peace, but is not willing to fight and do anything for peace, to take action. A church that is not willing to speak truth to power. And a church that's not willing to take a stand, because I believe there are times when people of faith must take a stand. And sadly, in my estimation, many times they don't take a stand. Maybe they want to remain problematic. So Western Christian approaches to the land, we see them as a problem to peace and justice efforts by actively empowering the occupation passively through their silence, but also problematic to interfaith initiatives, to interfaith engagement. Christian Zionism, by the way, is known for its Islamophobia, and also relates to Jews mainly as objects in their eschatology, not as partners or people of faith necessarily. And that's why, by the way, many Jewish voices today are speaking out against Christian Zionism, as highlighted by a recent documentary called Till Kingdom Come by an Israeli director, and many other studies. And in a twisted irony, Christian Zionism poses a threat to the Christian presence in Palestine, because without true peace and without stability, our presence is in danger. I know I must speed up. And my fifth point is that Palestinian Christians have spoken. We're not silenced despite all of this. I hope that my book is part of a movement. I know it is part of a movement, and I certainly do not stand alone. We have spoken, we have been speaking. The question is whether people have or are listening. Thanks, Yazid, for mentioning many examples. In the beginning, I saw in participation, we have both His Grace Bishop Munib Yunan and Riyah Abul Asal. Both of them have also been important voices in this endeavor. And certainly, we cannot ignore the contribution of his Beatitude Sabbah and many other theologians. The Kairos document, to me, remains one of the most, if not the most important document in this, because it brings all these voices together. And even as a small college like the Bible College, we have engaged with evangelicals and Christian Zionists themselves through the Christ at the Checkpoint movement. Palestinian voices include both challenging biblical interpretation. Does the Bible really teach that? That's a question we have often asked. And it has led us to write biblical exegesis. I have written on the Promised Land and many others. Of course, many still look at it as not authentic theology because it did not come directly from Cambridge or Oxford or Dallas. It's viewed as a contextual Palestinian theology. But when a white person writes it, it's true theology. And I think that also needs to be challenged. Palestinian Christians have highlighted the importance of justice. And we have also speak prophetically. As I said, it's not simply about talking, but acting and calling for nonviolent resistance. For us, justice is foundational to any theology, and theology must be prophetic by definition. But we have not stopped at challenging Christian Zionism, but we look for a vision of a shared land. That's why, to me, it is not enough to simply say the occupation is wrong or Christian Zionism is wrong. But I propose in the book, and a big part of my book talks about love your neighbor as yourself. Who is my neighbor is an important question. I think, to me, the most important thing is we have to remove these boundaries and humanize, engage, see the good in the other. I write in the book about the Muslim neighbor. I write in the book about the Jewish neighbor, seeing them as people of faith, seeing them as partners, as neighbors, and challenging them in the spirit of love when needed. To me, this is an important contribution, and it is a call for Christians for a new paradigm of thinking, rather than looking at our land through the lens of end-time prophecy, or looking at Jews as objects in an eschatology, or looking at Muslim as a threat, to really break down all these barriers and walls we have constructed and engage with one another. And in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and I'll end with this point, the end goal must remain for us the concept of a shared land that I push in the book. To me, this is a foundational principle. The land belongs to God. It does not belong to any people group, any religion exclusively, or any people group exclusively, or any ethnicity exclusively. Yet at the same time, we all together belong to this land, God's land. And as such, we must learn how to share it. And I talk about sharing the land as opposed to dividing the land. To me, dividing the land brings us back to the concept of walls. You stay in your corner, I stay in my corner. We don't necessarily have to engage with one another or like one another. And I don't think this works. What we need to accept one another, we need to share the land, its resources equally. We need to have the same rules apply on same people. That's why, as we remember to challenge the occupation, we must also remember to challenge the nation-state law that the Israeli Knesset passed in the last few years, which constitutionalized discrimination against non-Jews by claiming that the right for self-determination in Israel is exclusive to the Jewish people only. Our response to this exclusive ideology is the ideology of sharing the land, accepting one another, and it begins by ending the occupation. But it cannot be the goal, ending the occupation. It's something I always preach about and tell my students. We are not fighting to end the occupation, but to have the Jew as a neighbor, to have the Israeli as a neighbor, to live in peace with one another. So as we strive for a just and peace reality, together, the Palestinian theology and in this book, I call for an end to the occupation as a first step and challenging any exclusive theology, ideology, religious or non-religious, and moving together through this reality of a shared land, a reality or a concept that I developed in my first book, From Land to Lands, but I speak more about in this book, in the last chapter in the book, The Other Side of the Wall. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to introduce not just the book, but my thinking, and more importantly, the Palestinian Christian community and the Palestinian struggle for justice and peace.
Thank you, Munther. Thank you. Thank you also for remembering Bishop Riyah, one of the living voices of Palestinian Christianity today. I'm very particularly grateful to you for addressing some of the root causes in this presentation of the deadly circularity of oppression, something that I think Lord Williams touched on a little bit briefly in his opening address. And I think part of what you've touched on in this introduction reminds us that we should make no mistake about the origins of this deadly circularity of oppression in European Christian anti-Semitism before anything else. So as we celebrate your book here, I think we need, with you, and you've helped us do this perhaps a little bit more livelier, that need a challenge for the realpolitik that triumphed and still triumphs over justice for all concerned in the land. Now, at this point, I am going to ask our next speaker. We are very privileged to have a respondent and a discussant with Dr. Munther with us today, the Reverend Professor and author Colin Chapman, an Anglican priest who has lived in the Middle East for 18 years, teaching in seminaries in Cairo, in Bethlehem, and in Beirut. Colin is an old friend. We relate to him as a mentor and a teacher and a source of wisdom and learning. He taught the study of mission and the study of religion at Trinity College in Bristol, and was principal of Khoury-Machool, a mission training college in Selly Oak in Birmingham. His last job before retirement was teaching Islamic studies at the Near East School of Theology in Beirut in Lebanon. His books include Cross and Crescent, Responding to the Challenges of Islam, and Whose Promised Land, and a new book that we are looking forward to is Christian Zionism and the Restoration of Israel. How should we understand the scriptures, which will be published in the USA later this year. So I would like to invite Colin to respond to Munther now, please.
Thank you, Yazid, for your words of welcome, and it's a real privilege to be involved in this webinar. I want to respond to Munther by asking some questions in a moment, but before I do that, I just wanted to say very briefly why I personally feel this book is so very significant. The first is the very obvious one, that it's based on his personal experience. He's actually living in the context that he's writing about. In fact, he's lived his whole life under occupation, with all that involves, the checkpoints, the roadblocks, and the separation wall. I vividly remember a car journey with Munther and his wife some years ago, when they were driving from Bethlehem to Ramallah to visit his in-laws, and we had to drive along the Wedinar road, a terrible, tortuous road, much, much longer journey to get to Ramallah. That's the context in which Munther is living. Many Christian Zionists, and many of the people that he's challenging in the book, are writing about the situation in academic ivory towers in the West, but he's actually living in the situation. And one of the things that impressed me about the book is that it's full of very powerful and moving personal stories. The second thing that I find so impressive is that Munther writes as an academic who's also a teacher and a pastor. So he's taken the trouble to study the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and he really understands the biblical and theological issues in all these issues. I remember some years ago meeting with Munther and his wife in a cafe in Oxford when he was doing his doctorate. And so everything that he writes in the way of biblical interpretation is based on some very solid scholarship. It's also significant, I think, that he understands the mindset of Christian Zionists and is able to challenge them because he's starting from the same understanding that they have of the inspiration and authority of the Bible. So Christian Zionists can't say to Munther, you're a liberal, you don't accept the authority of Scripture. He has the same understanding of the authority of Scripture, but of course he differs very much over interpretation. And the third thing is that Munther, as I see it, is trying to articulate a genuinely Christian response to the whole Palestinian experience. He's not simply repeating political slogans. And one of the things that has impressed me constantly when I've attended Christ at the Checkpoint conferences in Bethlehem is that here are Christians who are trying to live out the Sermon on the Mount. If the Sermon on the Mount was addressed to Jews living under Roman occupation, here's Munther and his colleagues who are trying to work out how to live the Sermon on the Mount under Israeli occupation. So if I can go there to some questions, Munther. The first question I think would be to do with the United States. And I have read that anything up to 25% of Donald Trump's support base would call themselves Christian Zionists of one kind or another. Do you see any significant changes in the situation in the United States, Munther? Have you seen people changing their minds and thinking again about Christian Zionism and coming to understand what you're talking about and respond in a different way to the whole conflict?
Yeah, thank you, Colin, for your kind words. And for mentioning Christ at the checkpoint. To me, I always say theology can only be written at checkpoints and in the context of conflict and in context and not in ivory towers or in libraries. And yes, maybe I failed to mention that to us, the Sermon on the Mountain is a hugely important text when it comes to Palestinian Christian theology, and certainly I have discussed it in details in this book. Do I see a change in the American public? I hope so, because we have been discussing this and writing about this for a while. And we have seen churches take strong positions for justice and for challenging the occupation. I see more hope with young evangelicals and young people in general in the United States. The question is whether it's enough to make any difference at this stage, because while we are encouraged by many new movements and voices in the context of the United States, at the same time, I cannot still get beyond the idea that more than 70 million voted for President Trump. And in a way, there is a response and a strong polarization happening in many circles today. People on the right against, seeing building bridges with Palestinians. So, at one sense, I am encouraged, but the general picture doesn't look so good. And what we continue to constantly see that when it comes to taking a stand, especially for politicians or people who understand the thing, it is still a reality, it's still a fact that you cannot make it in the political ladder in the United States if you have a pro-Palestinian stand. And so we've seen one after the other, even Christian leaders, when going to politics, abandoning their previous positions to support justice for Palestinians, because it will mean their political downfall. And until that changes, I don't have any hope from American politics.
Munther, can I go on to a second question? I'm glad you've emphasized the idea of shared land, and you've emphasized it in the book. But how do you begin to think about the debate whether there should be one state or two states? It seems to me that if you are going to talk about a shared land, we've got to have a discussion among ourselves as to how that is actually going to work out in practice. Is it going to be, I mean, many people would say that the two-state solution has been dead in the water for many, many years. If the two-state solution is dead in the water, what alternatives are there? And at the same time as talking about theology, and do we not have to at least discuss openly among ourselves what kind of political solution we think would be just and peaceful?
Yes, and that's why, Colin, I'm a theologian, not a politician. But it is an important question. And yes, you're right. The two-state solution has been dying for the last 15 years. So it seems it has a very strong medical system that keeps it alive over these years. I think we must also ask, before we answer this question, why did the two-state solution fail? Is it just to begin with? Is it really what people wanted? Is it based on the idea of sharing rather than separation? To me, as I said, I look at it simply is that the mentality that let's separate because we cannot get along is not a recipe for peace. And to me, I feel that it is our role as Christian leaders. I can only speak as a Christian leader here, to promote the ideals of the God we encounter in the Bible, the ideas of justice, of equality, of the same rights, and continue to challenge and put pressure on politicians, and to gather around us all the Christian voices around the world, to put this pressure on politicians to accept the humanity of the other, to go for a just peace. And I am more than convinced that if there is the true will, we can come up with solutions. We have the creativity, and other solutions have been proposed. A confederate has been proposed. Reverend Naim Atiq talked about it in one of his books. The idea of by two governments in one country. Maybe there is still a way to rescue the two-state solution. I don't know, but my point is, if any solution is based on injustice, if one solution is imposed by one on the other, to me, that's where things will not work. And finally, it's important to engage what we already have. We currently have one state, whether we like it or not. We have one state and a community that is controlled, oppressed by that state. That's why many have described it as an apartheid state. Whether we want to call it an apartheid occupation, the naming itself is not the issue, but the system is not just, and it must be challenged.
Thank you, Munther. Perhaps I ought to note as well that it would be probably a little bit ambitious to provide solutions to all the political problems that we're facing. And I think the main issue here is that your experience as a practitioner on the ground with your own contextual theology, that the issues that you've raised about the questions of the land and its significance is perhaps what should raise questions for political debates rather than necessarily giving the final answers to everything In fact, one of those attending with us in the conference has already sent a question asking, isn't Zionism as old as the temple? You know, she was, whoever, I can't remember the person is, but suggesting that, you know, referring to your earlier comment about Zionism, before Zionism was established, you said, you referred to earlier English evangelical writers such as Lord Shaftesbury and others. And the questioner was asking, you know, isn't Zionism as old as the temple, as it were? And of course, there are different aspects of this among writers of various Western churches. The land is seen as a significance for both Jews and Christians in that regard, beyond the significance of all other lands. And it's seen as a source of continuing hope for Jewish people through the millennia of exile and dispersion. So from your own experience as a Palestinian theologian, answering those questions, you know, how do we re-emphasize, shed further light from what you have said on these issues?
Yeah, thank you. Let me first comment on the statement, Zionism is as old as the temple. I truly believe, you know, the Bible is a fascinating book. You know, obviously, I love the Bible and invest a lot of time studying it. And if you look deeper, you see multiple voices sometimes. I believe sometimes talking to one another. And among the important voices that I hope we elevate in the Hebrew scriptures themselves are voices of an inclusive Zion. The idea of a temple, for example, in Isaiah 56, that shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Well, all the differences between Jews and non-Jews disappear. Ezekiel 48 is another obvious example, which ironically is the exact opposite of the current Israeli nation state law, because there it states you should treat the stranger residing among you as the native born. You shall give them an inheritance in the land just as you give to your children. In other words, I don't think that, you know, I truly believe that in the Bible itself, we see a tradition of an inclusive land, inclusive people of God. And I see it in both testaments, and I talk about this in the book. And these are the biblical texts that we should all embrace, I believe. And even though, yes, land is significant, I don't think that our faith collapses if we don't control the land or live the land. I think Jesus's discussion in John chapter 4 about it's important how you pray more than it is important where you pray. I think this is an important concept. I think Jesus's teachings elevate the worth of people over above the worth of place, of stones. And if we continue to fight over places and geographies as if they are more important than, you know, people created in the image of God, I think that this is a serious problem.
Yes, thank you. Colin, back to you. Do you have any other interventions that you wanted to share?
Munther, some of the fiercest critics of Christ at the checkpoint have been Jewish Christians, Messianic Jews. What is the root of the problem that they have with what you're saying, and how do you engage with them in particular?
Yes, Messianic Jews are, for the most part, belong to a school of interpretation that's very literal, you know, more in line with evangelical traditions, even though they don't like to call themselves evangelicals. And they highlight biblical prophecy And to us, it's more important to be prophetic than to simply engage with biblical prophecies about end-time scenarios. To them, the whole idea that what they see is a fulfillment of prophecy, we see as an occupation that on a daily basis oppresses us, is not a welcoming problem. And I think many times, and sometimes maybe we are at fault as Christians for this, we fail to put the biblical principles of love, of justice, above our own national ambitions. And many times I think one of the things that we emphasize with Christ at the Checkpoint is let's talk to one another. Let's try to understand one another in a better way rather than simply speak to the others. So by and large, the Messianic Jewish community has boycotted our conference and has written against it, and even described it as part of liberal Christianity that has gone astray. But to us, as I said, theology can only be done at the Checkpoint. It has to deal with daily life issues. And that's why one of the questions I always ask Christian Zionists, if you believe the land belongs to the Jews as an eternal possession, God bless you, that's your belief. But what do you propose that I do? Should I leave the land? Should I accept to live under occupation? Should I accept to live as a second-class citizen in a Jewish state? What is your proposition on it? So we want to bring the discussion to the realm of ethics and justice, because if our theology, I believe, does not lead to justice and peace, then I think to looking at all people equally, I think there is a huge problem with that theology. And just to emphasize that not all Messianic Jews don't believe in what we do. Many just support our endeavors. Many are in the same way that today there are many, many strong Jewish voices for what we say and what we do, and both of which I try to highlight in the book. The problem, Colin, and all, is that, as I said in my discussion, these Jewish voices and Messianic Jewish voices who want to support the Palestinian cause do not have a room at the table in most Christian Jewish dialogue groups. And that's a sad reality to me.
Thank you, Munther. Now, one of the things that I particularly think you've done in a good way was the fact that you are sticking with the Bible in a sense. You take the Bible seriously, and you're trying to understand it in your own context, creatively, let's say. My question is, how do you think is that approach that you are developing effective among the communities, among the people? Some might think that Palestinian theology is very much the work of an elite group of scholars, even though local scholars, but not engaged much with the wider community in Palestine. Perhaps you can shed a little bit of light on that side of things.
Certainly. So first, just to comment that, yes, to me, the Bible is crucially important. I grew up reading the Bible. I finished it from cover to cover when I was 13 and 14. I studied it. I preach about it every Sunday from it. And the most important challenge is to bring it to life in the lives of my congregations and readers. How have been our efforts met? I think that we have done a better job in the last 10 years than in any previous years in communicating this brand of theology and interpretation to our local community. Not to our own fault, by the way. I say that because we've been exhausted just trying to engage with the wider church and Christian Zionists. Many times our own folks. Till today, I engage in a lot of discussions with my Lutheran colleagues in Germany, in the United States, in Canada, about these topics. And there has come a time in which we looked around and we say, you know, we've exhausted most of our energy in trying to address this problematic interpretation, and maybe we have failed to engage more intentionally with our own people. That's why today, you know, we've published in Arabic my book, The Introduction to Palestinian Theology, and it's been well circulated, and not just among the, you know, seminaries and colleges, but even to my surprise, a lot of universities and secular universities and Muslim groups are studying it and engaging with it. We created many young groups to engage with these issues, and so I think, Reverend Yazid, we are now making some impact among young people and clergy, now that we are intentional in addressing these issues.
Yes, thank you so much, Munther. That's really good to know. Now, one of the consequences of the dwindling numbers of Palestinian Christians in Palestine at the moment, as you yourself mentioned in the book, is I think that the more likely the churches are generally defined solely by what the hierarchs say and do, because there are less and less people around. And of course, from my experience of living there myself, even when that is well said and done by the hierarchs, it increasingly lacks the credible connection to what the mission of the church perhaps is meant to be. And perhaps I'm putting you here in a slightly challenging corner, but do you have anything to say to that reality yourself today as a local pastor who's losing communities, and where we see churches are defined simply by what bishops speak or say and nothing else?
And we have two former bishops in attendance, so I must be careful. I'm just joking. I think that Palestine is a unique place. Jerusalem is a unique place. I think there is a very important role that the heads of churches have to play. And it's not easy, because the heads of churches in Jerusalem have to play a very balanced game between the Israeli government, the Palestinian Authority, and the Jordanian government, and then the heavy international interest in the land and in the church, and all the strong connections we have with the international church bodies. So I think this is a unique position. And so I hope we don't lose that sight. At the same time, I believe that the church, by its definition, is a grassroots movement. The church, in its fullest expression and its most authentic expression, is a grassroots movement that work among people. And I hate to see that presence disappear in Palestine, because without our congregations, I don't think it's a true presence. And I believe some of the most important voices today and contributions of Palestinian Christians are not necessarily those of church, of theologians, or even pastors and priests, but of youth group leaders, of our scouts, of our teachers at the schools. That's where a lot of the real work is being done. So without having to choose one over the other, I think heads of churches have some important role to play, but at the same time, I think that there must be a connection always with the real presence of Christians with the theological centers, with the students, with the youth groups, scouts groups, and so on. They are, to me, the real expression of Christian life in Palestine.
Thank you, thank you. I want to thank both of you, both Munther and Colin. At this stage, we will move to cover some of the questions that have been sent through. As you can imagine, we are limited in time, so I am not going to be able to cover every single question that has been sent, unfortunately. But I have a couple of questions in front of me here that I've noted I think you might be interested to engage with Munther. And of course, I invite Colin to intervene if he wishes to as well. The first relates to the question of interfaith dialogue. It suggests that it reminds us perhaps that Christians in the Holy Land are caught up between a political reality of occupation, but also the rising of Islamic fundamentalism, perhaps, or political Islam, and some Christians see themselves caught in between, as Bishop Riyah Abul Asal once said. So how do you relate to that yourself, if somebody faces you with that kind of question?
You mean of being caught in between?
Yeah.
To me, it's, even though I understand what's meant to be communicated by that expression, to me, it's important to highlight that when I speak as a Palestinian. I cannot hide my identity. I cannot simply remove the Palestinian hat and simply put on, this was the discussion I had with young people yesterday. And whatever happens to the Palestinian community at large happens to me as a Christian. I have to deal with congregants who are fighting to keep their land. I have congregants who were put in jail by the Israeli military, who were, so this is something that is, you know, we're a real and important part of the Palestinian people. And as such, we cannot simply look at it objectively as if it doesn't relate to us. And second, my fear is that the expression communicates the notion that this is a conflict between Jews and Muslims, but it's not. This is a political conflict. I think it's extremely dangerous if we turn it into a religious conflict, or as if a conflict between the God of Islam versus the God of Judaism, or as our Christian Zionist folks would like to say, the Judeo-Christian God versus the God of us. I think it's important to emphasize that this is a political conflict over a political dispute over sovereignty over land. And it's not the fault of, you know, certainly there are religious dimensions, certainly religious people can make it worse, but it's not a clash between Judaism or Jews and Muslims, but rather, as I said, it's a political conflict. So for that, that's why, you know, to me, how I want to say about that certain phrase.
Thank you. Just one more question. What do we need to do? This is a question from one of the first people attending. What do we need to do to get the church leaders around the world, specifically in the West, to stand for peace and justice? What are pastors and vicars and priests why are they afraid to talk about Israel, Palestine?
Yes. Recently, I was involved in a document called Cry for Hope by the global Kairos for Justice movement, both Palestinian Christian leaders and friends of our movement, Kairos Palestine, globally. And we challenge churches around the world to, first and foremost, to engage in a process of thinking or of studying and investing in this conflict and asking what can we do. Every church must ask this question. Every church must study. And in that document, we emphasize that theology matters. And it is still the case, even today, that in many church documents, in many church books, in many understandings, there is no room for the Palestinians, or even, you know, there is a promotion of a theology that dismisses or is not for peace. So we challenge churches to engage in theological discussions about it, to give us voice as Palestinian Christians, or as I always say, amplify our voices, because we're not heard enough. It's still, you know, the fact that for many people, they're surprised to know that we exist. So engage in theological studies. And I think it's also important, and that's another thing we mentioned in the document, to engage forcefully with the Palestinian Christian presence in the land and take lead from our perspectives. Don't ignore our reality. And there are many excellent initiatives on the ground, Christians and also Muslim and Jewish and secular, that are trying to bring people together, that are challenging the occupation non-violently. And let's invest in these initiatives. Let's empower these initiatives, not just, as I said, the Christian ones, but all the initiatives that work truly for a just peace. You know, many things can be done even about pilgrimage, the way pilgrimage is done. Make sure to tell your tour organizers that we want to spend more time in the Palestinian side. We want to visit Palestinian churches on Sundays. We want to worship and pray and listen and meet and engage. There are groups like the Alternative Tourism Group that arranges for tours where you spend time in homes, in refugee camps, you visit settlements, you listen to Israelis and Palestinians. In other words, do it in a responsible way. And even when Palestinians choose to resist non-violently, I think it's important to at least allow us this right and not simply silence any Palestinian voice or movement as and dismiss it because it's, you know, you don't want to engage in controversial and to us that's frustrating many times, even when we call out, you know, and say challenge some Israeli policies. Some of our Christian friends will tell us, you know, that's not the right language or that's not helpful. And, you know, they're not in our shoes, they're not in our place, but they're only trying to dictate to us how we respond. It's problematic to me. Many things can be done that I hope I was helpful in these suggestions.
Thank you, Munther. I think two just last comments from me to bring this to an end before we move to the last stages of this event. Just to say two things to you, that one of the more powerful parts of the book that I came across in my reading it was the sections where you talk about lament and hope. And it reminded me of a saying that was recently encouraged by the New Testament scholar here and the Anglican bishop N.T. Wright, who responded to the current health emergency that we are living, the coronavirus crisis. He noted that the Christian faith is not going to necessarily provide answers to all disasters, but he, like you, suggested that we might begin to recover that biblical notion of lament and face and engage with questions about death. But of course, as we face death, there is also the beginning in struggling with that unmanageable blank mystery, if you like, of God in the light of the cross persisting. We begin to see the enduring newness of life that comes through and encourages people like you and others in the country to bring hope and light in the midst of what is a very dark times often for many people. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And my last comment is that your name, you are a bearer of your own name. You bear your name rather well, Munther. It reminds me of that Quranic verse in Surah Araj that says, إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنذِرٌ وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. You are a warner. And the Munther is the person who is very much seen as a respectful, wise, good leader. And we wish you well to be truly the bearer of that name for your own community and for the rest of the Palestinian people as well. So thank you so much, Munther, for everything and for all that you've shared with us today. I'm going to now return the microphone back to Victoria, I think.
Right. Sorry, just 1 second, please. Okay, so thank you, sorry for that. So dear guests, we now have the great privilege to be introducing our colleague, Professor Hartej Gill from the University of British Columbia, who will comment on our discussion. Professor Gill was born in India in the state of Punjab. She taught in French-English immersion programs before joining the Department of Educational Studies at UBC in 2006. Working from an anti-colonial and decolonizing framework, Hartej is interested in leadership for social justice and transformative education, and in bridging the gap between theory, practice, and social activism. As a scholar practitioner, she uses her praxis to co-create transformative and reciprocal relationships between universities, public schools, and the communities. Thank you.
Sat Sri Akal. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful invitation and to be a part of the learnings and teachings today. As I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Vancouver, British Columbia, where I live as an uninvited Punjabi settler on the stolen, occupied, unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, the indigenous peoples of this land. I would also like to acknowledge the struggles of colonialism of my elders and ancestors in India under centuries of British Raj, and now in Canada, where they face daily systemic and legal racism and classism, despite being in what is seen as a multicultural country. It is these collective experiences which guide the work that I do in academia. And so finally, and most importantly, I would also like to say how honored I am to have witnessed this sharing by Reverend Dr. Munther, which I must admit for me was the first opportunity to hear anything relating to Palestine in academia beyond the work of my dear colleague, Dr. Mazawi. So thank you, Reverend Dr. Munther, for your courage and invitation in your book to journey with you to better understand your experiences and your faith. Because as you state in your book, our existences are inherently intertwined with one another. Although I am not Palestinian, I connected deeply with your narratives of lament and hope. I listened and witnessed the sharings today as a scholar, as an educator, and as an activist. And I will briefly share from these three perspectives, which we will all agree are not mutually exclusive. So as an anti-colonial and decolonizing scholar and qualitative researcher, your words resonated loudly for me, given that I come from a family of freedom fighters in India. Your narratives provided me with many resonances, which I interpreted through the theoretical frameworks of colonialism, coloniality, systemic racism, oppression, and racialized violence. The stories you tell are your stories, but many are also my stories and societal stories of many marginalized peoples whose lands have been occupied and continue to be occupied. Hearing and reading these counter narratives and keeping them alive to echo in our lands, our hearts, and our consciousness is, in my view, the first step towards raising social, historical, political, and global consciousness of the struggles and realities of our peoples, and in this case, the Palestinian peoples. These counter narratives are crucial. They are a crucial intervention, and I would add that they are a crucial interruption to the hegemony of missions of civilization and colonization. It is only by naming the hegemony, the colonial oppression and violence, and by speaking back to the injustices, as Reverend Dr. Munther has done so eloquently and so courageously in his book, that we may begin any call to action, especially a radical one, as we have been asked to do today. And as an educator, this book will be, and this is a second point I'm coming from as an educator in a higher education institution. This book will be a significant curriculum for us in higher education, along with being part of the larger movement. I concur that a theology of hope, along with a pedagogy of hope and solidarity, is crucial to the context of multi-layered colonialisms and where the complexities and histories of colonial oppression collide, as they do very much in this current context of which Dr. Munther speaks. These multiple realities and continuities of memory are entangled in different and sacred ways, and a discerning theology and pedagogy, which takes into account the intersecting oppressive realities, if our aim is to keep alive the hope, is crucial. And in fact, hope is not even a choice. For what alternative would we have? And the third point, as from the perspective of an activist, I must acknowledge the privilege that I have due to the sacrifices of my elders and ancestors in my current role as an academic at the University of British Columbia. I must recognize the responsibility that this brings in addressing injustices and decolonization for our communities, especially the most marginalized communities, which in the current context is also the basic needs of the refugees of Palestine, as we work for land sovereignty and self-determination rooted in justice. I was heartened by Reverend Dr. Munther's resistance, resilience, and critical engagement, especially as a theologian. This must not be an easy task. So his engagement in the difficulties of the reality without avoiding the political questions or rendering this work ahistorical or apolitical, speaking back critically in this way, giving voice to the Palestinian community and calling out for collective action to end the occupation is crucial to the process of decolonization. And Dr. Munther, your call to be radical with love and peacemaking are inspiring, for they move us to employ our agency and move to collective action and decolonization. And I would add intergenerational capacity building. And I was impressed to hear you speaking about the youth that have been part of your work more recently as well. And working also across social and politically constructed borders and walls. So I will end here and hold my hands together for Dr. Munther for your inspiring, compelling book. And that has really moved me significantly. So thank you. Shukriya.
Many thanks, Professor Hartej. And with this section, we have concluded our event for today. And thank you, Professor Hartej, for your very encompassing input. Now, I would like to introduce Professor Andre Mazawi, who will be presenting a vote of thanks. Andre Elias Mazawi is Professor of Sociology of Education and co-director of the Centre for Culture, Identity and Education at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. A Palestinian born in Jaffa, he is interested in Palestinian contributions to liberation theology and in the political history and sociology of Palestinian education and teachers' labour conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure, a privilege to share with you this witnessing, as my colleague, Dr. Gill said. I'm grateful for the opportunity, first and foremost, for the Cambridge Center of Palestine Studies. I'm also grateful for the different words that have guided us throughout this event today, starting from the words of the Right Reverend Dr. Williams, who inspired us by opening our thinking on the different aspects and meanings of the concept of wall, taking it from a metaphor that would symbolize many different aspects of our world, whether these are physical spiritual, political, or economic. I'm equally grateful to, as I said, to the center and to its director, Dr. Machool, for initiating this absolutely inspiring and fulfilling, fruitful conversation and exchange. Not least, I'm very grateful as well to the inspiring contributions, as my colleague Dr. Gill captured it in her words, of Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac. His presentation, in a way, offers us the possibility of redeeming theology from its frozen elements and horizons. And it is an interesting proposition that one could say one would usually view theology as the way to get to something transcendent. And what Dr. Reverend Munther suddenly highlights is the need to redeem, to reclaim theology from itself, to keep it relevant and viable, sustainable in the world of human beings. I appreciated very much the insights that were generated as a result. I'm also very grateful to Professor Reverend Colin Chapman for his questioning and positioning of the different questions that went really hard to capture the imbrication and entanglement of theology, religion, faith, and the world of politics and power. It seems that these entanglements are avoidable. But yet, as we are reminded by all the contributors, and firstly, in the book of Dr. Munther, we cannot escape them. And the only way is to find the hope in them, redeem them from their own contradictions. Equally, I am very honored, actually, to have had our colleague, Professor Gill, participate today. Her vision, grounded in anti-racism and decolonizing perspective, is a very important perspective that, to my mind, complements Dr. Munther's perspective. The need to decolonize theology has never been as imminent as Dr. Munther has just articulated to us. Dr. Gill also reminded us that the question of occupation, military or otherwise, of dispossessing others, has cut through history in such ways that we are all liable of falling into the trap. Starting, her words, as she did so nicely, by recognizing that we are all on this country in Canada, where I am situated too at this moment, we are all benefiting from the fruit of colonialism and the dispossession of Indigenous and Aboriginal First Nations. I'm also grateful to Professor Yazid, Reverend Dr. Yazid Said, for so eloquently and graciously facilitating the flow of contribution, but also in his questions, highlighting the centrality of theological thought directed towards community building and community solidarity. I'm a lot actually grateful to Victoria Araj for facilitating all the logistics, often at crazy times, and allowing us to come together so gracefully. So what do I take from this event tonight? I take 2 points that I would like to share with you and conclude. The first is the imperative for theology, in order to remain viable for today's world, is to leave the ivory tower and relink itself with the political, economic, social, and cultural challenges of our time and places. And I'm saying this, it might sound like a banal platitude, but actually, as Dr. Munther highlighted, one reads the Bible as this infinite litany of contextualized happenings and events that happen in particular places and spaces over time. And for me, that is a big lesson. To think of theology not as abstraction, but as concrete engagement and concrete work. And for me, that decentering of theology, to make it relevant for context, for people in the here and now of their lives, is well captured in Dr. Munther's book on page 223 and please allow me just to read a short segment. Dr. Munther says, if theology ignores an entire community and is satisfied with them being pushed behind walls, whether physical or invisible, then there is a problem with such a theology. There can no longer be a theology of Israel without a theology of the Palestinians. And I would add, without the theology of the excluded, discriminated, racialized, oppressed, and pushed out, as Dr. Gill has signified. I would extend that. In that sense, Palestinians, or a theology of the Palestinians, are by essence, in essence, the theology of the cause of those dispossessed, marginalized, excluded, and as Lord Williams indicated, silenced and made invisible. And Dr. Munther continues, and when it comes to the context of the land, all theologies should serve the causes of justice, peace, and reconciliation. And I appreciated the fact that for him, any theology that disregards this trinity, if you want, of peace, justice, and reconciliation, may lead us actually astray into radical forms of extremism, violence, and injustice. In that sense, the theology proposed by Dr. Munther as a theology of liberation, if I take the liberty to label it as such, opposes itself efficiently to the theology of empire, because it makes visible those that are made invisible. The second point, and last one, that I take from this gathering is the theology, to conceive of theology as a daily praxis, as a daily pedagogical praxis, one that looks at the world in its most material elements as part of identifying the core values that guide us in our world. And for me, when I read Dr. Munther's book, I could not but rethink Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, in which he says, speaking of Jesus' word to Peter, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. For me, it's significant because now we have in Matthew 16:19 an imperative to think theology from the here and now, from within the world, not as something transcendental that is ready-made out there to be captured by some kind of infinite Byzantine articulations, but that something is built from the within the pains and sufferings, from the sweat and blood, to find that hope that finally makes theology not so much about other thing than the transformation and transfiguration of this world. Lord Williams mentioned the graffiti on walls. I've seen many years ago, and I will complete with that, a graffiti on a wall in Italy, famous for its graffiti liking students in a university city. It read, and I'm translating freely from Italian, it said in bold red all over the wall, decrepit wall actually, the home will be when all of us will be strangers. And I found it later on as a verse from a poet, Italian poet by the name of Francesco Nappo. And when I reflected on this verse, and now particularly as I reflect on this verse in relation to what we've heard, I cannot think of any better way to capture what Dr. Munther's book is about. To share, in a way, we must allow ourselves to become a way of strangers, or to estrange ourselves to be able to be inclusive, to open ourselves and our identities to different and multiple realities. And in that sense, make our presence not just human, but a presence that recognizes all the elements, material and spiritual, in this world. So thank you, Dr. Munther, for such an inspiring work. And as Dr. Gill has just stated, I think it will find good homes not just in Bible colleges or seminaries, but I think it will find its home also in faculties of education and in works that targets the building of communities. Thank you very much, everyone.
Many thanks to Professor Mazawi for a fascinating vote of thanks. And I would like to also thank all of our participants. We're very grateful for your attendance and your questions today. And I would also like to thank our very esteemed panel for their brilliant input. You might like to know that our next event is on Thursday, the 25th of February at the same time, that's 6 p.m, that is GMT. And the event is titled The Audiovisual Palestinian Heritage, Origin, Dispersion and Digital Preservation, Preliminary Studies and Future Prospects. And that will be with Dr. Bashar Shammoud on his newly published book. Please sign up to our mail list to keep informed of future events through our website as well, which is www.ccps21.org, and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. The video of tonight's event will be on our website very soon. Thank you very much again to everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and I hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you.